Good afternoon and welcome to Stan Clouse, legislative candidate from District 37. Thank you, Stan, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, volunteer state president, and advocacy lead volunteers Joyce Beck and Mike Barwig. We also have joining us today Alan Reaganborn, who is an AARP volunteer and also a constituent of District 37. Stan, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. So to start us off, Stan, if you don't mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and your campaign, and we try to aim for 5 minutes or less on that, that would be wonderful. And once we've completed your opening, we'll move into the questions. So welcome, Stan, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and thank for having me. And I talk pretty fast, so if I get too carried away, just let me know. Yeah, I was born in North Platte. Went to school in Brady, so I'm a Nebraska guy. Worked for just a week or so ago, just totally retired from MPPD after about 48 years in the utility business. Helped build the Gerald Gentleman Station coal plant in Sutherland, so lived in North Platte, and then about 1997 moved to Shelton with MPPD, and I managed billing offices all around the central Nebraska area. And I was on a planning commission in North Platte, heavily involved in the community in North Platte. And then when I moved to Shelton, I got elected to the Shelton Village Board. And then when I moved to Kearney a few years later, after MPPD went through some organization and closed their offices, and I've been in Kearney ever since, probably around 99, 2000. I've been on the city council since 2003, and I've been the mayor of Kearney since 2006. So in that role, I've had several different governor appointments. I chaired the Human Trafficking Task Force before that was moved over to the AG's office. I've been appointed to the Natural Resources Commission, where we work with the NRDs and the natural resources to ensure that sustainability of our water resources, and that's statewide. So I just had my reconfirmation for another term on that, depending on how the election goes. So I've been on that commission for some time. I've been very active in the community of Kearney. Oh, and another appointment is the Chief Elected Officials Board, where we work with the Department of Labor, and we talk about the things that happen with labor across the state. And then in Kearney, very active, been involved in several awards through UNK, through the Sertoma Service to Mankind. I was instrumental in helping push through a half-cent capital improvement tax, which is a sales tax, and we use that for capital improvements, in which the number one thing on my list was the building of a new senior center in Kearney. I served on a senior center board and partnered. My mother-in-law was with the Mid-Nebraska Community Action and managed a senior center in North Platte while we were there. And then my wife, when she was alive, worked for Mid-Nebraska Community Action here in Kearney, and she had McCook and North Platte and some of those areas kind of followed in the footsteps. She was a director, and then she had her degree in social work. And then she passed away a few years ago. And so I've just, my whole life has been really public service, and in the public sector, either my real job with MPPD or my role with the city council and making Kearney the community that it is.
Thank you, Stan, for that. Thank you for your community service. I know we had talked a while back when we were scheduling this appointment about the senior center, and I always say Kearney has one of the best in the state, if not the best, and so you should be very proud of that. And I know citizens there appreciate it. So thank you for your leadership in rolling that out. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was one of those when I first moved here, and somebody found out that my mother-in-law was involved with the senior center, so they got me on the board, and I was just shocked at the quality of the senior center in Kearney. And I said, our seniors deserve better than that. And so that was a push that we made. And it was a community-wide effort, and we're very proud of our community center and senior center.
Kearney's doing it right, so hats off to you all for that, and as you continue that work. We'll now move into the question section. Again, we provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50 plus across Nebraska. Again, these are issues when we talk to our members and your constituents that come forthright about what are important to them. And so that's why we bring them to these kind of conversations. Looking in the 3 questions that we have to allot about 5 minutes for each of those. Our first question we'll begin with is on health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. And Joyce Beck is going to take that. So go ahead, Joyce.
Well, Stan, good afternoon, and thank you so much for giving us some of your time because we know you're very busy. And I also like to say I'm sorry to hear about your wife.
Yeah.
84% of Nebraskans over 45 say staying in their home as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services, as well as area agencies on aging, become important assets to caregivers as they care for loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of the loved ones, but it also provides relief for an already strained long-term care industry. I have 2 questions for you today. The first one is, what would you do to protect and/or expand the home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of sufficient workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And the second question is, what would you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
Well, those are loaded questions, and tough ones too. Years ago, I had, because I'm a wood carver, and a lot of the old wood carvers are the older guys, and they talked about the homestead exemption and how costs and the taxes were really putting a pinch on them. So I think as we have the emphasis on the property taxes, I think there's things we need to take a look at on how we can keep them in their homes, as long as we can. And then that in turn goes in, because I've lost both of my parents, and my dad had a stroke, so he had a lot of issues that he was able to stay in their home until he passed away. But my mom, we had to put her in a nursing home, and that's a challenge when you're faced with that. As far as the healthcare, that is a huge challenge. And when I look at what's going on across the state with nursing homes closing down, and it just seems like the trend is just the opposite of what it should be. And because as our seniors are aging, we're losing these facilities. It's going the wrong direction. And I think what we've done, at least through working with the Med Center and Kearney and the Veterans Home, we obviously have a nice Veterans Home here, is getting those kids trained and that want to work in nursing or healthcare, and doubling down on the numbers that we can put out. And I know that UNK is doing that, and the Med Center in partnership with UNK. And I think the rural health initiatives and rural health buildings that we're working on, I think that that will help. And I think that's just one of the biggest keys, is keep those facilities funded, keep the training going, so that we can get those kids the training they need so that they can pursue those careers. Another area that I think is some of the reciprocity on some of the immigrants that we have. The immigration has that negative connotation, but there are a lot of people here for the right reasons, and they want to work, they want to do the right things. Some of them are trained, and we just make it challenging. So I think that should be an area of focus as we work through the Department of Labor. What do we do with that group, and how do we get them into our workforce? So I think if you can keep folks in their homes as long as you can, by working with your tax structure, working with your communities, and keeping them in their homes, because the outcomes are better if they're living in their own home. And then you don't have the high costs of nursing and those types of things. So I think too is I've spoken to the hospice group, but the home health is a better way to phrase that, because hospice has that negative connotation. But if there's things that we can do with the home health and keep them in their homes, and the outcomes are generally better. So I think those are a few things that we can do from the labor perspective, but yet trying to keep them in their homes as long as we can. And another piece that we're seeing is in Kearney anyway, we got a lot of folks moving into Kearney to be closer to kids and grandkids, and and things like that. And that's a productive workforce if they want to. So we can't just dismiss an age group because we think they're too old to be in the workplace. There's a lot of things that they can do, and it's not all just church related, but there's a lot of opportunities out there if we just go into it with an open mind.
Well, thank you, Stan.
Yep.
Thank you, Stan. And we sum that up. I guess I would say, we always say aging is not they're an asset, not a liability. And I think you've done a nice job of reinforcing that, especially as older people are moving into Kearney. There are things for them to do, and we need to find ways to accommodate that. So, and I also know Kearney's doing a great job, UNK, again, with the expansion of those nursing programs. So hopefully there will be some fruition. And the other is the immigration piece. We've heard that many times, and I know there's some stuff to work out at the federal level too, but definitely, I think you're on the right track with some great ideas. So thank you for sharing those. Number 2 question, we're going to switch over now into consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections, and Mike Barwig's going to take that. So go ahead, Mike.
Good afternoon, Stan. Scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams such as wire transfers, gift card scams, and schemes involving real property. Nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. With that in mind, our questions for you are: consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online, financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices, and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? In other words, would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices, enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund, and implementation of preventing or corrective measures to assist in combating owner-seller housing impersonation fraud?
Well, the short answer is absolutely. And, working with MPPD, we talked a lot of training on cybersecurity. And so I've always had a heightened awareness. When you get this email, it doesn't look right. Well, it probably isn't. And I just get totally frustrated when I hear some of those horror stories. And I'll go back to the COVID year. I had a good friend of mine, he's a few years older than me. He called me one night and said, "Stan, I got that card for you." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you sent me that email about this Walmart gift card to give to the city employees and then not tell anybody about it." And he says, "I just wondered." I said, "Well, how much was it?" And he said, $500. I said, "Man," I said, don't fall for that. That's the oldest trick in the book." And so we were able to fortunately get some of his money back. But I couldn't believe they fell for it. It's, and they're sharp, and most of them aren't even in this country, which is a challenge. So if there are things that we can do to throw the book at them, I'm all for that. And if it's kind of, and I know this is a touchy subject too, with voter ID. If you're going to do things, if you're going to buy gift cards, make it so that, people can understand that, yeah, they went through a screening process and this is legitimate. When I walk by the counters in the Walmarts and Walgreens and see all those cards out there, it's no wonder that things get screwed up. We're just too loose on the regulations. So I have no issues with that, because I think that's one of the biggest travesties there are. And then people losing their homes because of some of those scams. And honestly, it's kind of like, and I'm going to give you guys props, because when I read the AARP magazines and they talk about fraud, it's covered very well. And people ought to be reading that literature and trying to understand it. But I also know you're getting a point in your life when you're in your late 80s and you think you know, and you don't even know what's going on, because technology's changed, and the AI and the voices and things like that. It's scary, and so we just really need to protect our seniors. And I know through the senior centers giving training classes and what the AARP is doing. But at the end of the day, we got to have regulation that has some teeth in it. and, throw the book at them. I have no issues whatsoever with that, because you reach a point that aging population is just as vulnerable as our kids are on the other end of the spectrum. And so we always talk about protecting our kids. Well, guess what? We need to protect our aging ones too.
Yep, very good.
Thank you, Stan, and thank you, our Fraud Watch Network. I appreciate you bringing that up. And yes, that is a big priority for AARP, not only in our magazine process, but also the Fraud Watch Network that we do nationally. So education is a big piece for us, but I really do appreciate your commitment in the penalties and working through those issues, because the problem continues to get bigger and we have a lot of work to do to stop it. So thank you for your support of that.
And the bad guys are always finding new ways to make it worse.
Absolutely. And yes, we've got a lot of work to do there. Our last question, Stan, we're going to shift into another area called livable communities, and talking about helping people stay in their homes and communities, affordable housing. And Susan Daycamp's going to take that. So go ahead, Susan.
Good afternoon, Stan. It's nice to meet you. So Nebraskans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population. And research shows that most of them want to remain in their homes and communities as they age, just like Joyce mentioned in question number 1. As housing costs continue to increase, the older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize, and thus they're being pushed out of communities and homes that they have lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as accessory dwelling units, intergenerational housing, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And then the second question is, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans who qualify continue to have access to that tax relief program?
Okay, I'll do the second one first. I already touched on that. The homestead exemption, that has to be supported. And it's kind of interesting when you see some of the property tax issues that, we've been paying taxes for 70 years. Maybe we ought to not pay them anymore. That was an interesting concept. So yeah, absolutely. I do support helping with the homestead exemption and giving our seniors on fixed incomes. And when you see what inflation does to a fixed income, that is a challenge. Now, as far as affordable housing, that's one that's always a challenge for a community like Kearney, because it's a little more expensive to live in Kearney than in other areas. And one of the things that we are looking at, and we went through some change management where we presented it to multiple groups, is the ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, and that's something that we've talked to folks. I think we're open to that. The challenge you have, though, is you also have to pay attention to the public safety aspect of it. And so you can't just take a garage and convert it, because there are public safety issues there as far as making sure you've got the right footing, stability and things of that nature. So Kearney is in the process of doing that. We might be a little slower than maybe some other communities in the state, but we feel that that's important to our community, that we do make that option available to those that want to do it. And in terms of, gosh, when I look at how Kearney has grown, and I'm just speaking to Kearney, of course, with apartments, and it's just expensive. And I've talked to folks about, living in the surrounding communities, but the reality is to build a home in a surrounding community is just expensive, because then you tack on mileage, costs just as much to get a load of concrete to Gibbon as it does, to North Kearney. And so the costs and inflationary costs are just cost prohibitive. And we do get a lot of people moving here, but that's the problem with the housing industry, is that you can't afford as a senior to downsize, because whatever you're moving into costs you more than what you're leaving. So why would you do that? And so people think that is a bigger issue for the young families, but it's just as big an issue for the seniors that really don't want that big a house. They really don't want strangers or family living with them. But the options just aren't really there yet. So I think if we start looking at the affordable house or the accessory dwelling units, I think that's a key step. And then just start being creative on how do we work it. Because when I look at some of like the Brookstone Gardens and some of those, they're very nice. Well, yeah, but look at the cost. You know, it's expensive to stay in some of those facilities, even though they're very nice. It's a challenge. Affordable housing is one that I've just struggled with for a lot of years. Is how is it defined? What does it mean? Who does it impact? But I think as we start looking at some of these other options and apartments, you know, if you're a senior, do you want to be on the ground floor and have all the noise above you and all, you know, all the things that go with that, you know? So I think about a lot of those things. So we just have to keep working on it and keep working together and figure it out if we have some other areas that we can work on. And we have a couple in Kearney where they're senior housing developments, and that seems to work pretty well. But you don't get a lot of those being built right now because you look at demand, you know, supply and demand. Maybe that'll change. Maybe we'll be able to move on from that. But that as the number, if I had the answer to that, or if we had the answer to that, it'd have been done. I can tell you that. So we just have to keep plugging away.
Great. Thank you, Stan, for your thoughts and insight on that issue.
Thank you, Stan. And definitely, we're thrilled to hear some of the things you're saying, because it's really a lot of the work that we're trying to do and move forward. You probably are familiar with Senator Lowe's had a couple of bills this last session, LB 1165 and 1166, which would again open up or allow us a little bit more zoning flexibility to allow an accessory dwelling unit to be built on the same lot as a single family house. I know the municipalities and cities oftentimes have a little bit of concern with that, with the removal of the local control. I'm really proud to hear your leadership from Kearney's perspective, that's something you're looking at and expanding in that aspect. I know Senator Armendariz has a legislative resolution coming up in the Urban Affairs Committee here in the next month to hear about that. But you're spot on about the affordable housing definition. I think we still have a lot to work on of what that actually means. And then again, what are some incentives and ways that we can move forward to make it right for not only the cities, and not losing that local control, but also for builders and that sort of thing. So really excited to hear you talk about that.
That zoning, as I read it, I about choked when I saw it, because I did not like that at all. Because zoning are the single biggest issues that we have. And that's why I felt, okay, we need to be working on this at the local level. We don't need that control taken away, but you better be working on it. And so I'm excited to see what we can do. And I've been supported by the Nebraska realtors, and you know, I've talked with those folks a lot, and they say, well, if it's zoned this area, can we build a mother-in-law house in the back? And if the lot's side, you know, there's some things that I think we can do, short of saying, well, cities can't control zone. What I read was like, whoa, this will blow up in our face big time. And part of my campaign talking points is with the experience, we can, I think, head off some of the unintended consequences from some of this legislation. But to do that, you need to sit down and you need to talk about it. And you need to have people that, in my view, have lived through it and understand what those unintended consequences can be. And that doesn't mean you stop it, but it's like, okay, how we need to make sure we're paying attention to this piece. And that's how I've always rolled in all my years of service. Okay, what's going to happen 5 steps down the road? Because I get this, but how are we protecting ourselves, and are we going to have the end results we want and be okay with it 5 years down the road? So I think there's some things there that we need to do. And if it's working together with municipalities and communities on the local control and the zoning, and I think there's some things we can work on.
I appreciate that very much. And yeah, I think hopefully as we move forward on this discussion, there's more of, you know, what's inhibiting, but what's some of the ways that we can work around that and work together. So I really appreciate your thoughts. And again, that forward thinking on that aspect, because it'll be great to see Kearney being a leader in the state on that issue as well.
I'm not sure how much a leader, because we're pretty expensive. Housing it's pretty expensive in Kearney. I hear that all the time.
No, I think it's expensive everywhere, Stan. So again, I just appreciate the conversation, because it is a critical piece, and you've done a nice job of talking about tying it all together, what those parts are. And for regardless of where you are on the lifespan, affordable housing is hitting everybody. So I'm excited to work with you moving forward on some of those resolutions. So those are the 3 questions we had, Stan. We are coming to the end of our time together today. But I want to get back to you just a few minutes to talk about what your priorities are for serving in the legislature. I know you've talked a little bit of that or touched on that a little bit already, but if you have specific issues you plan to work on and address, or if there's certain committees you want to be on, but I want to give you back some time to close out before we end our interview today. So go ahead.
One of the things as far as committees, I've looked and as I've gone through and reviewed them, probably the Revenue Committee, because I understand how the tax structure is and where our revenues from our community comes in from. And I think a lot of people don't understand all the tentacles that are out there that affect our revenue. So I think the revenue would be interesting. Natural resources, because of my years on the Natural Resource Committee and protecting our water supply and our natural resources in the state. Urban affairs, just simply because of the city government, municipalities, and the experience there. And then another interesting one, and John Lowe was kind of part of this too, was government and military veterans affairs. Having a veterans home here, and I'm a big supporter of our veterans, and hopefully most of them would tell you that they've always had my support. And that's just an area that I think we need. Those areas are interested. And then, of course, Blair McDonald, she tells me, well, get on committees that don't meet on Fridays. So
absolutely. Nobody wants to meet on a Friday, right?
Yeah. So anyway, that doesn't come into impact. But I'm used to working a lot of hours and just doing a lot of things. I've been, when I was meeting with Don Wesley, I was talking about running for MPPD's board because I didn't like the direction it was going. And he said, Stan, you'd get bored. He said, you got to have 50 things going on, and that's just how you're wired. And he said, you would like being in the legislature with all the issues. And that is how I'm wired. As far as a particular item, I think what's come up obviously is property tax. I think inflation's driven property tax as a low-hanging fruit. I think we have many more problems on inflation, but the property tax is an area that is first and foremost that we have to start taking a look at. I'm a strong proponent of saying, okay, let's just chill. Let's put a freeze on the valuation increases. Let's just put a freeze on this. You're not going to solve it in 2 weeks in a special session. Let's just take our time and figure this thing out. And I think there's some things that we can do and not jeopardize our revenue streams and keep our state the way we want it. I think we got to be careful there. So property tax is one that I think's really popped to the forefront. Basically, what I've told people is I don't have a single agenda item or a single bill that I'm interested in because our state's too diverse. And I have a hard time believing that we have 800 bills introduced every session. We don't have that much screwed up in our state. And so we have things that are screwed up, but so I'm going in with an open mind that we have a lot of issues. Let's work on them. And probably the biggest thing that I bring is to listen to understand. That's how I've always operated. And I want to understand both sides of the issue before you make a statement or before you take action. I shouldn't say statement because a lot of times I'll put my foot in my mouth, but you need to listen to understand. There's always two sides to every story, always. And some people don't get that. They see it, through blinders. And I'm like, you can't operate that. So those are the core things. Listen, understand, use experience to maybe prevent the unintended consequences, and then just go in with an open mind. And now it's like, well, we're going to be working on property taxes. Pretty sure that's going to happen. So that's really, as I've looked at the legislature over the years, when I was a young pup growing up in North Platte and Brady and even 25 years ago, I'd go down to the legislature and I think, wow, to me, that's the ultimate in public service that I can do. Some people do it serving in the military. Some people do it in other ways. But to me, that's the ultimate service that I can do for my state. And then I'd put those senators on until I got to know a few of them. And I'm like, geez, I think I can do that. Because some of them were like, okay, I don't know how you got elected, but let's go. So that's kind of how my view is. It's something that I think I can bring some things to the table and listen and work. And I've tell people that special interests are not a bad thing. If you think special interests are a bad thing, then you don't know how the process works, because these special interest groups are representing your and my interests. We don't have time to spend on it. That's why we have people carrying our interests forward. So I'm a little bit different in that regard. I listen to them and we work together and we'll figure it out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stan, for your time today. Thank you for taking the time to visit with us. We wish you the best with your campaign. Look forward to working with you in the legislature. But again, I want to thank you most importantly for taking the time with the AARP today to meet with us. Thank you.
And I thank you guys. I apologize again. I got to get there first. So there's a process you got to go through. So I'll keep working on that and be working hard. And I've told my campaign people we take the high road. I don't want any negative stuff. We build on what we've accomplished and or I've accomplished and helped accomplished, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. So thank you all.
Thanks for your time, Stan. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great
Thank
day.
you, Stan.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.